Hi folks, Rusty here again, and today I'm going to talk about your cooking options when you're out on the trail. Whether you're using the pre-packaged meals because you think your wallet is too heavy and you want to lighten it up, or you're doing ramen noodles or something in between, or even something home prepared, picking the right stove can make a big difference. Before I start talking about stove options, let's just talk about cooking on the trail in general. Why do we do it? Well, for me, it adds a comforting dimension to my backpacking experience. Nothing better than being able to get into a camp, set up my tent, and quickly prepare a meal. If I'm with a group, there's the social aspect to it. There's a shared social experience. It is usually done at camp. Now, there's no rule that says you couldn't stop in the middle of the day, set up your stove and cook a meal in the middle of the day. Most people don't do that. It actually saves you weight on longer trips, because if you carry food that's ready to eat for a long trip, that's an awful lot of food, because most of the weight of food is actually the water weight. So if you're reconstituting meals at camp, you're using water from local sources, you don't have to carry that weight with you the whole way. On a shorter trip, maybe not so big of a problem. On a shorter trip, you probably could bring meals prepared for you, as long as you don't care that you're eating cold meals the whole time. So in this presentation, we're going to talk about stove capabilities, and we often measure them in terms of liters of water boiled per your fuel units. So here's the stove options. The first and most basic one is you can go stoveless. After that, most of the stoves are categorized by the fuel that they use. There's alcohol stoves, liquid fuel, isobutane, propane, butane fuel, or solid fuel stoves. Now, the ones with the check marks next to them are the ones I'm going to review here. I have never used an alcohol stove. I just don't feel comfortable giving any advice on it, but I will leave a link in the description of an article that actually gives you the pros and cons of the alcohol stove. So if you're interested in going that route, you should definitely consider that. There are two ways that you could go stoveless. The first is just plain don't cook. If you're on a shorter trip and you just bring your prepared food with you, that's probably a viable option. On longer trips, I've actually seen a lot of hikers do what's called cold soaking. In other words, instead of adding hot water to whatever they need to prepare, just think of a package of ramen. You could put it in cold water and you could wait and wait and wait, and eventually it would absorb it and soften up. So you could eliminate the weight of carrying the stove with you. To me, the convenience there and the taste of the food, I don't know. I want it to be warm. I'll never be cold soaking, but it can be done. The other stoveless option I have actually used, and that is to use campfires. I haven't used it since 1979, but in 1979 I did go on a 2.5-week backpacking trip, and I cooked over campfires the whole way. I put out a video recently about the changes in hiking over the past 50 years. Cooking over campfires as your main planned way of doing it is not really a viable option in most places. It may be simply not legal to build a campfire where you are. As an example, in the Grand Canyon, there's a wildfire danger. Any place like that, you just might not be able to legally build a campfire. The other circumstance that you can come across is when you come to a campsite that is so camped out, so many people have been there, there's just no available wood. You really shouldn't be taking wood from standing trees. You've got to get it off the ground, and there might not be much of it. And another thing to consider is getting the fire going. That's time consuming, and it's messy. You get ash all over the place. It's just not a convenient way to cook given what a stove can do for you. So those are just things to consider. The stoves and their fuels each offer advantages and disadvantages. They work over different operating temperatures. That article did say that alcohol stoves are probably not suitable for winter camping. Not a problem for me, because I'm not going to do that anyway. There are trade-offs in the fuel, the weight of them, the speed of the boil that you get from the fuel, the availability and transportability. You're just not going to be able to bring any of these fuels if you're traveling by airplane. You're going to have to acquire them locally. So the availability of them is actually going to be very meaningful to you, because it's not something you can just search around for. You have to know that you can get them at the beginning of your hike, wherever you are. Then there's, of course, the convenience of the stove and other non-tangibles, like how comfortable are you using the stove, that sort of thing. I'm going to review one model stove for each of these fuel types, liquid, solid, and the propane. For the liquid fuel, I have used what's called an MSR Whisper Light stove, shown here. It uses either kerosene or white gas. It's like having a gas stove burner with you. That's really convenient. I found it to be best on group hikes. When we were on group hikes with 4 of us, it was really great to have a portable gas burner with you. It requires a preheat cycle. So what you do is you pump it up, you fill this little preheat basin with the liquid fuel, you light that, that actually heats up the intake tube there, and then the gas coming out of it after that is heated up enough that it'll actually be gaseous rather than liquid, and then you can light the burner and voila, you've got a burner there. That is something that made me uncomfortable, certainly the first few times I did it, and I think most of the time when you hear about there being a fire in a shelter, it's because somebody set up one of these in a shelter and the fuel spilled all over and boom, the shelter is burned down. It takes about 1 ounce of fuel per boil. They say 3/4 of an ounce, but when you consider having to do the preheat and everything, I'll bet it's closer to about 1 ounce per boil, and that's the figure I'll be using. It comes with a windscreen and reflector. It does not come with a pot. It needs the windscreen and the reflector for effective heating. So it's got a 16 to 19 ounce base weight depending on the size of the fuel container. That doesn't include any of the fuel, but just the weight of the unit. For this particular model, there are 3 different fuel canister sizes that you can get, ranging from 11 ounces up to 33 ounces. So that's why there's that variety in the base weight. It depends on what options you select. When I've used solid fuel, I've used an Esbit stove. Esbit makes a couple different models. The one on the left here is the one that I use mostly now. It's basically just a pot and a little section for putting the fuel in and heating it up. The original Esbit was this more of just a little tin box. Problem with that is you need to bring everything else with it. The solid fuel that it uses, it's harder to find and it's expensive. It's also very heavy. It uses about a 1/2 ounce of fuel per boil. Slow boil takes about 9 minutes. The fuel tablet's good for about 11 or 12 minutes. And they say you can just blow it out when you've got your boil going and restart it next time. I certainly never did. I'm not going to say nobody does it, but that just sounds too messy to me. What I would do is after I got the water boiling, knowing I only got a little bit of that heat left, I would let it continue to boil whatever water I didn't use for reconstituting whatever meal I was doing, or I would add water to it, and that way I would at least get the advantage of the rest of the heat from that fuel tablet, and then I would have warm water to clean up with. This also needs a windscreen and reflector to be effective. They don't tell you that, but I just found that it is totally ineffective if I didn't have that windscreen. So I gave away my MSR Whisper Light, but I kept the windscreen and the reflector. Reflector's part that goes under, windscreen goes around, and I use that with this stove. The fuel is hard to light. You basically got to have a lighter with a long stem neck on it, and you've got to hold that tablet for 4 or 5 seconds while you're trying to light it, and then get it into the unit. They claim it burns clean. Their definition of clean and my definition of clean are completely different because it leaves a nasty residue on the bottom of the pot. And it's an environmental hazard. When you clean it off, I usually wipe it clean with a tissue or something and a little bit of water away from the stream. That goes into my trash. You can't leave that junk out there in the woods. It couldn't possibly be safe for the wildlife or the plant life out there. It's an 11 ounce base weight, including the reflector. That is actually the lightest of the stoves that I have used, to be 11 ounce at the base weight. And it's very reliable. There are no moving parts. If you can light the tab, you can boil the water. And I found this to be a really convenient size, and I really loved it. I actually brought it with me on a 566-mile hike before I got the jet boil. And the weight of the fuel was one of the big reasons that I switched over to the jet boil for these longer hikes. So for the propane, isobutane, butane type of stoves, I'm going to talk about the Jetboil Stash. That's the one I happen to get. Jetboil makes a lot of different models, a lot of different price points. There are other manufacturers who make things that work with these fuel containers. This is the one I happen to use, so I'm going to talk about it kind of generically. It uses canister fuel. And the canisters are widely available because these are much more popular than these solid fuel tablets are. And you can get them in different sizes. 100 gram, 230 gram, 450 gram. 450 gram is just under a pound. The fuel is very weight efficient at about 8 boils per ounce. Compare that to the 1 boil per half an ounce or per ounce of the other two stoves. It boils a liter in about 2.5 minutes. Does not require, as a matter of fact, you can't use a windscreen or reflector with it. It just wouldn't be safe, actually. I think it would heat up things too much. So this is a fantastic stove. It's about 14 to 19 ounces base weight. It depends on which canister you're using. Now I say including an empty canister. You'll never bring an empty canister with you. That's useless because these aren't refillable. You recycle them and buy a new canister. But in order to compare apples to apples, I'm considering the base weight to include whatever canister you're bringing with you. There are logistical issues tracking your fuel usage. You can't see what's in there. The most accurate way is if you have an accurate scale is to weigh the can and figure out how much is left in there, and you can get the weights of the bare empty canisters and then figure out how much fuel is in there and how many boils you have left in it. Or you can keep track of how many boils you're doing. So if you're going to do cooking other than boiling, where you might need a pan or something, you're going to need to bring some cookware with you. Or if you're using a whisper light, you're going to need to bring cookware with you because it doesn't come with a pot. So here's a lightweight option that my wife found for me. She actually bought them at Walmart. They were on clearance, so these sets were $5 each, but they retail for around $15 or $16. Definitely under $20. The Walmart special, some off-brand I'd never heard of. Very light, and I'll be honest, it's pretty much a piece of junk. But I mean that in the most positive way I can. Piece of junk meaning it's very light, it's very cheap, and it does the job for you. This is one of those cases where you don't have to spend a lot of money for a piece of equipment that's actually going to serve you well. And for example, the pot in there, it's too small for anything. I mean, I suppose you can bring it along with you and you could heat up some water in it, but I leave the pot home. If I know I'm going to be doing cooking other than boiling water, I bring this, what's called the fry pan part and the bowl part. In the handle of the fry pan, you can loosen a wing nut on it, bring it around, and it all nestles together real nice, and you can keep your cup in there or whatever else you're going to be. You can actually use that storage space because it's empty. So this is an example of a really lightweight item, really cheap, and when it's too dinged up or falls apart, you just throw it away and get another one. Let's do a weight comparison with these 3 stoves that I've gone over. So we're going to look at various different length trips as measured in boils. 45 boils is kind of the longest that I've ever had to be on, because while I was out there for 42 days, I was only boiling once a day, and I was eating at other places a lot of times, stopping at hostels. You don't have to do any cooking if you're at a hostel, or if you've just been to a town and you get a nice restaurant meal. So the Whisper Light is the heaviest of the options. That's why I say it's good for groups. That's a lot of weight to carry by an individual. You split that among 4 people, that's not so bad. The solid fuel Esbit is actually lighter the shorter your trip. It is the lightest option, and the weight of the fuel starts to overtake the jet boil once you start getting out to be about a week or 2 out there. The jet boil starts out at 17 ounces, but you get a lot of boils for just a little bit of fuel. So that's why for the longer trips, I've opted to go with that. Now, this assumes for the Whisper Light that it's 8 ounces extra for a pot of some kind. That's just an estimate on my part. And with the jet boil, in fairness, that's the minimum weight. That was assuming that you started the trip with exactly the right amount of fuel. You're probably never going to do that. So the weight will probably be a little bit more. Yeah, these are only approximate, but you can see that for group trips, Whisper Light or a liquid fuel. For shorter trips, solid fuel is the most weight efficient, and for the longer trips, the propane is the most weight efficient. You could do the same comparison when it comes to cost. The latest Whisper Lights I've seen over $100. The fuel is actually pretty cheap. It'd be about $150 though for stove, bottle, and fuel is in the range about $10 a gallon, but a gallon of fuel does quite a bit for you. The Esbit Cook Set, it's about $50, but it's about $1 per tablet. The jet oil, the prices really vary. They're all over the place depending on what model you get and what you're using it for. The one I got was like, I think in $105, $115 range. Those fuel canisters are like $5 for the small ones, and they're only $6 for the medium-sized one and about $9 for the big ones. So the fuel is really cheap, and I think it's an availability sort of thing. So that's my review of the stoves. I hope you found it useful. Do your research. If you have a friend who knows about them and you can go on a hike with him or her and actually try them out, that's really the way to see what's going to work for you. So as always, I ask you to like, comment, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. Please put in the comments what topics that you, if you're a beginner, might want to know about. So thanks for listening.